Hello, and welcome to our status start date lesson. So what is the status start date? This is the date in which a student's enrollment status change became effective. For example, the day in which the student officially became half-time at your institution. Also, please note, this is different than the date of determination for which a student's status change became effective. Why report a status start date? To help capture the date in which a student's status changed. To help ensure accurate enrollment data is provided to loan servicers for students receiving Title IV aid, and to help ensure loan repayment dates are accurate based on a student's last date of attendance. When should you report a change in status? If the student was in a higher status and dropped to a lower status during the term, provide the date the student dropped to the lower status as the status start date. Always report the status start date if the student has a non-enrolled status, such as graduated, deceased, or withdrawn, or is also an approved leave of absence. Report the date stored on your student information system that indicates the date the student's status change was effective. We will accept school-provided status start dates throughout the term for full-time statuses. If you want to send the updated status start dates for full-time statuses, include those in your extract and we'll accept them through our standard process. Note, if the status start date is not provided, we will revert it back to the term begin date for full-time statuses, but the users will be notified that we are doing that. Once you've clicked on the error correction link, you may be brought to the error report homepage, where you can view all of your current errors and warnings that need correction or review. These include warning number 258, 260, 263, and 264, as well as error code number 7. Please note, it's very important for you to review the student's records under these warning codes to ensure that the incoming data is accurate. If anything does look unusual or incorrect, an analyst at the clearinghouse may reach out to you for clarification when reviewing the records. Now let's take a look at some of the status start date warning and error codes that could appear on your error report. The first warning we'll go over is number 258. This is a status increase during the term when the status start date is nulled. To resolve this warning for a full-time student, either remove the status start date or leave the provided status start date as is. On the Error Resolution Report page, the error resolution instructions say, student status has increased compared to previous report for the same term. While a student's status start date is not required in this instance, if no date is present, the status start date will be defaulted to the beginning of the term being reported. If you wish to have the change date captured at the campus level, please provide the date the student's status changed. No changes are needed if you want the date to default to the beginning of the term. Also note that all full-time records throughout this application, the status start date is an optional field. To review, click the plus button under the details column in the row with the student's name. The student's being reported as full-time with no new status start date. Here you can leave the record as is and allow us to revert the status start date to equal the current term begin date, or you can update the record to provide an updated status start date for the student's full-time status. Once you have made the necessary corrections and are ready, you can click the Submit for Validation button. If no corrections are needed, then you can leave the record as is and move on to the next record for corrections. Once you null the status start date on a student's record, you'll see the following screen-level validation for warning code 258 pop up. Please note that if you click Continue and no new status start date is provided for the student's current enrollment status, then our system will automatically default that date to equal the current term begin date. If you wish to provide a new status start date for the student and didn't on the previous page, please select Cancel and enter an updated status start date before submitting for validation. The next warning code is number 260. This is a status increase during the term and a status start date is present. To resolve, for a full-time student, review the status start date provided. If this is the date you want, you can leave the date as is. If you want the status start date to equal the term begin date, you can null the date from the student status start date field. The student status has increased compared to the previous report for the same term. While a status start date for a full-time status is not required in this instance, you have provided a new date. If you wish to capture this change of date, no action is needed. If you want the increased status to be defaulted to the beginning of the term, please remove the status start date. Expand the student's record from the row with the student you wish to review. In this example, the student's status has been updated to full-time and a new status start date has been provided. Again, if you wish to capture this new status start date, you can leave the record as is and we'll now accept this date. Since the status start date is not required for full-time status, you can null the status start date and we'll update it back to the previously reported status start date for this full-time status. Please be advised that if you null the status start date, this will then create the warning code number 258. But in that case, no corrections to the warning 258 for this record would need to be done. If any changes were made to the student's record, then when you are ready, click the Submit for Validation button. The next warning code we'll review is number 263. This is when the status start date provided is prior to the previously reported status start date for the same status. In this case, the status reported for the student has not changed. However, a status start date has been provided that is earlier than that on the previous record. If this is an intentional correction to backdate the status noted, no action is needed. If no correction or backdating is intended, please remove the status start date and the date on the previous record will be maintained. Expand the student's record from the row with the student you wish to review. For this warning code, please click on the View Previously Reported Student Data link at the top of the page to see the last reported status start date and status for the student. If the incoming status start date is incorrect, you can either update to the appropriate date, or you can also null the status start date if the incoming status is a full-time record. If you're trying to fix an incorrect previously reported status start date, then you can leave the data as is. However, when an analyst at the clearinghouse reviews the data, they may reach out to you to confirm the changes you are trying to make. If any changes are made to the record, please click the Submit for Validation button. If no changes are made, then you can leave the record as is. The last warning code we'll be reviewing today is warning number 264. This is when the status start date provided is not within the current term dates. All data should be for the current term only, so please review and correct on the error resolution report as well as in your student information systems. Also note that this warning code is flagged for full-time, three-quarter time, half-time, and less than half-time statuses. To review the student's record, please click the plus button in the Details column. Also note that if you're trying to correct the status start date for a previously reported status that was incorrect, you can leave the date as is, but an analyst at the clearinghouse may reach out to confirm the data before processing your file. As you can see from this example, the reported status start date is outside of the current term dates. This warning code is flagged for the full-time, three-quarter time, half-time, and less than half-time statuses. Since the full-time status start date is an optional field, you do have the ability to null the status start date for these records, and we will revert it back to the previously reported status start date if the student was full-time, or if they weren't, we'll revert it back to equal the current term begin date. We highly recommend also reviewing the View Previously Reported Student Data link at the top of the student's record on this page to ensure that all of the incoming data is accurate. If the current reported status start date for the student is correct, then no changes are needed. If changes are needed to the record, please make those changes and then click the Submit for Validation button. Lastly, you may see error code number 7. This is when the status start date provided is older than or equal to 99 years from the current certification date of your file. To resolve this error, please correct the status start date for the current term. Then also please be sure to update your student information systems with this change to avoid this error from occurring again. Expand the student's record from the row with the student you wish to review. This is a very rare error code that you might see, but it could be flagged if the status start date was accidentally mistyped. Please be sure to review the data and correct accordingly to a current date. Also be sure to review the View Previously Reported Student Data if necessary. Once you are ready and made the necessary changes, please click the Submit for Validation button. So in conclusion, you have the ability to provide an updated status start date for all full-time statuses, but please note this is still an optional field to provide a status start date for full-time statuses. For any additional questions on the status start date, please review our blog post from October 9th, 2019, review our enrollment reporting program and testing guide, or contact us